Hi, and welcome back to our self-care series for superhero moms and really anybody who needs to prioritize self-care. So really could be anyone. And so today we're really excited to have this conversation with Mindy because I think she's going to talk about a topic that most of you are not going to relate to self-care, but she's going to share why this is so tied into self-care. And Mindy is both a certified life coach and a certified financial coach. And so she brings the both together so that people really understand why they do things the way they do them with money, and they have beliefs and emotions tied around it. And so, Mindy, I would love for you to share a little bit more about how you help people and what brought you here.
Yeah, so through my own financial journey, which I'll explain in a minute, and getting into that, but I find that, life's hard. We don't need to add anything to complicate it and make it more difficult. And a lot of times when we add into our finances or avoiding our finances is when things get complicated. It's just, we get stressed and everything, and then we avoid it, but then inevitably we have to look at them. We have to deal with them. And so I have like different experiences of even my own life that I've struggled with that. So I'll explain some of that as we go. But what brought me to why I ended up, I guess, doing financial coaching I kind of like do the mindset in financial coaching, kind of blend them and make them work. Because I feel like if you have to do the mindset work to figure out what your money beliefs are and what our stories are around money and what value we put on a dollar amount in our bank or anything like that, we have to get to the core of what that is first. And then we can then grow into like, okay, what are our goals and where we want to go and everything. And so that's kind of like the journey of my own journey that I've done. And so I feel like helping other people see that there's hope and there's possibility and there's growth, but also that when we release that financial anxiety, that stress over our finances, like how much more we have to give to the world, because that's not one more layer of like weight that is weighing us down and like taxing us or taking our attention or anything like that. So yeah, so I guess kind of back up to like kind of where things started years ago. I got divorced, and then I say I had a period of I went rogue, and I actually turned to drinking and partied and just was a mess. And there was times that I would remember, or I would wake up at a friend's house, not remembering how I got there, but I knew I was at the bar before. I knew that I was now at my friend's house, and I knew my car was there, and I knew I drove myself, but I didn't remember any of that. Or there'd be times that I would wake up the next morning and completely different clothes. I was home, fortunately, but completely different clothes, having to clean up from getting sick the night before. Things moved around the house because I had drank so much I didn't remember. And I got in a relationship that was actually really rough, and it ended up getting so bad that I had to get a restraining order and things. But in the time that I was with that person, in really like a month or two's time, they had, out of fear, I just kept saying yes and didn't stop them from basically using my credit to take out loans for vehicles, for motorcycles, for furniture, for credit cards, for all the things. And I got to the point where I was literally trying to rob Peter to pay Paul. Like it was like, oh, pay this credit card, but borrow from this source or another, and just kind of like never being able to like catch up. And I finally just kind of like got to the point where I hit rock bottom. And so I got out of that relationship, fortunately, but then it was like, I came to the realization I have got to make a change. And the change didn't happen overnight. It has been a long journey, and I'm still on the journey. Fortunately, I've gotten out of that financial situation and was able to rectify all that and get it taken care of. But at that time, within 2 months' time, I was driven to about $80,000 of debt in that short amount of time. And so to get through all of that and get beyond that, and then now have my finances in order, with my husband now, and just having the freedom of like not panicking over that credit card bill coming in, or knowing that I have basically an emergency fund built for those times of those expenses that I'm not expecting and things. And it's like that freedom has been like a huge weight lifted. And so that's just like super cliff notes of like the whole journey. But like that, I know that freedom and that relief is possible. And then I want that for so many other people. And I want people to experience that and have the freedom and the joy, and just really to have the time and the focus put on more important things in their life, and not have the stress of their finances. Like that's just like a part of life, and that they can are just over here just enjoying life to their fullest, their kids and their families and just everything else.
Yes, this is amazing because you're able to say there is freedom here, right? And so many of us feel tied down by finances, right? And it starts for many of us at a young age with school loans and just carries forward to life. And so we just accept it as being normal. And Mindy, you're here to share that it doesn't have to be that way, right? You can free yourself from that so that you can focus on what is important in life. You can focus on giving back, right? You can focus on being more of yourself in life. And so that's why we're really saying that this is a form of self-care. Financial wellness is a form of self-care, so that you can present yourself in the world the way that you want to. Am I understanding correctly?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Because it's, it was funny because this morning I'm actually working on, because I every week on my website I put out a new blog, and the one I was actually working on this week that'll come out in a couple weeks is about our self-worth and our value, and what we put on that, what we put, what we make our bank account mean, or what car we drive mean, or what. And it's like, so I use the experience in the blog that's going to come out, is like, it was thinking about, if we have a person that's got $1,000 in the bank, they have a mortgage and they have no other debt. That's person one. Person two is you have a person that's got $1,000 in the bank, they pay rent, but they have $10,000 in student loans. And then person three is they have $10,000 in the bank, they also have a mortgage, but they have $10,000 in student loans, and they have $24,000 in credit card debt. Who has more wealth? Who has more worth? They're all equally worth and valuable people as what they offer to the world. And you were line all three of those up and not know any of that about them, and they were looked all the same. They're just three ordinary people. You wouldn't value them any differently if you didn't have any knowledge of that. So like we don't on a day-to-day basis, we don't know what people have when it comes to their financial situation. And so we don't go up to them and be like, how much money do you have in your bank? And then do a calculation and be like, oh, you're only worth this much to me. Like that's nonsense. So it's like so many times we put that weight on ourselves of like, because of the debt that makes us it means something about us, or maybe because of the dollar amount we do have in our bank account that makes us better than somebody else. Like when no, like we're all just human beings, and we are people. And like to basically kind of like separate the two of like, yes, there's our financials and it's data and it's numbers, and we have to have money to survive and live. But what we have to offer the world as a value, as how we show up, is just who we are as people. Like focus on just being human. And anyway, but
That's a deeply rooted belief, I believe, in our culture, is assigning our value based on what we have and how much we earn and
yeah,
all of that. And so that belief, for anybody who's listening, I mean, I would love for that to just be like, oh, and snap into place for you, but it really
it doesn't work like that either.
yeah. it's a little process to start diving into these beliefs. And so why is it so important for us to understand our money beliefs in order to achieve financial wellness?
I really, and for me, I've seen this in other areas of my life. And so it's like I've brought that into even like my financial beliefs and kind of like worked on them over here. And then I'm like, oh, this still applies over here, is the value and the worth that I've put on myself in other categories because of who I am or what I've achieved or what title I have. And I'm like, well, that still applies to my finances, is like I still can work on those beliefs and seeing like that this is or isn't, they're just my thoughts. Like, but to learn the awareness of how to have awareness around our thoughts and using that awareness piece in other aspects of my life and be like, oh, this is my awareness. And this is like all the mind thoughts and things that I have around my money or anybody with or without money. And instead of like, you see somebody that drives like a really nice car, be like, what is your first instinctive thought to that? Like, oh, those people are well to do or they're well off. But what if that's the one thought we may have? But then like, what if the other thought is like, you just see like, wow, that they might have a lot of debt wrapped up into that car. Like that's another thought. We don't have the true fact of it. And so just to even like realize that we have those thoughts consciously, even sometimes so much so subconsciously about like things that we perceive and that we see about other people, that we're doing that probably a very, very more deeply. That's not a good way to word that, but we're doing it deeply even to ourselves, even if we're not even realizing that we're judging ourselves, we're shaming ourselves and things because of sometimes a lot of the awareness that we don't even have around our own beliefs and thoughts about our money. But then once we like figure out like, oh, I am thinking that I am or am not is worthy or valuable because of not having a lot of money, or because I didn't get that promotion, or I don't have that new car or whatever, like just realizing that those beliefs are like really kind of hindering us from moving forward. They're keeping us stuck in like just hamster on a wheel almost.
For people who are following along with the series, I'm wondering if you're starting to hear a key element to all of these, which is awareness, right? I think awareness is our first step for all of this, of
Mm-hmm.
just paying attention to the thoughts and the things that we're saying about ourselves, about others, and instead of beating ourselves up more for thinking about that, get curious, right? Get curious about, well, where did that thought come from? Right. And so this gets applied to money as well, which, and it was the other way for you, Mindy, of like doing money first and then applying to life. So they're just so interconnected.
Yeah. And go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry.
No, and I was thinking about that and like, and giving people that hope. And I was reading a book just recently, and in the book it was referencing Dr. R.C. Snyder, and he came up with the hope theory. And I really liked it because it says that when we come to realize that I don't want to live this life anymore, that means we need to find and have the courage to change, which then becomes the hope theory. So then it's like we have to look at our ways of thinking, like what are we thinking and pursuing and the narrative that we're giving ourselves, and then like realizing that we have the power to change our thinking once we learn that awareness. And then we have to be like, okay, we're going to have obstacles in our way along the way, but that's human nature, and like we can work through those. And so even with our mindset, with our finances, and becoming aware of our current beliefs and then shifting them and aligning them to the goals that we want for ourselves, even financially, and then ultimately that just gives us so much more freedom and weight lifted off of us for sure.
Yeah. And I think that's that's a weight that I think that many people can resonate with, right? That we're all carrying around. Not, I mean, not all of us, those who have been able to maybe work through these beliefs, right? But I think that at one point or another, this is a weight that people are carrying around, regardless of how much they earn, right? It
Yeah.
it affects all income levels.
Yeah. Yeah. Because like, okay, so at the center of hope is the concept of like self-determination. Like we have to be determined and know what we want. And the belief, our beliefs will impact or influence our future, what we create. So we need to own our actions. We know that we can't change what we've done in the past, but we can have a mind shift, change our mindset, our beliefs, and trajectory to like what we want in the future. And I always like the concept of like focusing on our future self, like tapping into our future self, like where, if we were to look to our future self, like where is she on this journey? Like where at financial freedom, or at, just having her finances and done the work already, like what did she have to do to get there, and what is she thinking when at that point, now that she's gotten there, and then start working on those beliefs now, and continue to move forward. But we also have to trust ourselves enough to know what we want, be willing to go after it. And we a lot of times stand in our own way when it comes to our money, and because we have so many just strong held beliefs around money. And a lot of times it's even from things that we're taught in our upbringing, or the way we were taught about money or not taught about money, or what other influences in life we've been persuaded with around what certain money, having or not having money means, or the beliefs around money is like so influenced by just the outside world even, and then we just latch on to different things that have created our now beliefs.
I love that you're talking about this because it does go along with everything else we've talked about. And it's how much of it is the stress that we're putting on ourselves because of what we think about it, like the beliefs that we're putting into it and the meaning behind it. And what is the reality? Like a lot of us grew up with some of those beliefs and were brought up with and it's repeated throughout generations, right? So we keep repeating that as if it's fact, but we never stop to explore whether or not is it really, like, can I change this? And we do a lot of stuff around mindset and thought work and thoughts, and how just as humans, most of the thoughts that we have, like 80 to 90% of the thoughts we have are negative just as it is, and that we repeat those thoughts every day, like at the same level. So if you grew up believing these things about money and then you're just carrying it on because you're not, and the only reason we don't change it is because we're not aware, we don't look at it. And so that's why having these conversations helps us realize that we can start looking at those thoughts. And even if you don't believe right now, this is a good point of entry because you can start just watching what you're thinking and seeing how that affects you, so that you can start experimenting with new thoughts, so you can see if maybe, because I know that when I just let go of the old beliefs around the money, like the whole world's going to end because I made one mistake and I'm never going to recover, and then I just let that go and just I'm doing the best I can, then things start to I start feeling the weightlifting, and then I start making moves that get me closer to where I want to be. Whereas when I'm thinking like all of this is coming down on me, I'm not doing anything. I'm stuck. I'm frozen. So it's like, it's all.
Yeah. So like, I love, like you said, like, even if we don't start changing our beliefs yet, like just having awareness is like huge. Like, just be like, okay, this is like what my thoughts are on money. Okay. And, and then just having that awareness. And then over time is like, we realize like, we want to address our relationship with our money, because the way we think, feel, and act towards our money is impacted. And so we try, but the other thing too is like, we can't change our behaviors without changing our beliefs and our emotions around money, because it won't it won't last. Like you can put in something and change your actions, but it's not sustainable if you don't have belief and trust in it, or if it doesn't align with your values and where you want to go. So I was thinking that like the because we have, sometimes it's like we have almost like a love-hate relationship with money. It's like we're like, oh, if I only had more money, then things would be better. Or, if I had made more in my job. But, I heard somebody say one time, they were like, well, that if we believe having more money is going to relieve the problem, but the thing is if we don't know how to manage $1,000, we can't manage $10,000. So we have to learn how to manage our money, know what our mindset is, know what our goals are, our values are, in order to like restructure where we want to go with our money. So we need to build that positive relationship with money. And money conversations so many times are like, oh, you don't talk about money, but why? Like, we all have to have it to survive. And, we're just learning our beliefs and our goals with it is healthy, and it's important, to truly have that, like, it goes back to that, like having like that awareness, shifting our mindset, and then just like having that true freedom and emotional relief. And like I even say like an emotional freedom. I mean I've personally experienced that. Like, like my husband and I, we work for ourselves. Like we have the ups and downs of not having a guaranteed paycheck from an outside source, even though an outside source isn't necessarily a guaranteed paycheck, but we put more weight into that a lot of times, right? Like if somebody else is paying us, it's going to be there. Well, that's not 100% guaranteed. But like when we have our finances in order to be like, what, if like work slowed down, or if I did lose my job, like what is my plan? Like having that already built is like, I like the saying, it takes an emergency and just turns it into an inconvenience. And so an emergency, if you think about emergency, is usually super high stress. And so it's like, but now if we could just like turn it into an inconvenience, it's still stressful, but it shifts that whole emotional dynamic when it comes to like how things are going to go. And then we can maybe focus on like, if we relieve that portion of that financial stress from that, then we can actually really focus on like the problem, like, or the concern or need of like, okay, now to find a job, we have so much more energy and mental space to deal with the real problem at hand of maybe finding a different job or finding more work or whatever, when we can just set part of it aside. It's not that we still aren't concerned, but it takes some of that away from the angst of the situation.
So much of it too is about that belief in ourselves, and just looking at generations of people with like the way poverty, it just gets handed down family to family to family. And I think a lot of it is based on the beliefs. Like we think that this is my life, this is where I'm supposed to be. And the opposite is true for people that are born with money, or that follows generation after generation after they're used to it, so they have a totally different view because that keeps getting handed down. And I mean, that's just an overgeneralization, but what happens if like we need to learn how to see our worth in ourselves and what we can offer, because that doesn't always translate into our finances. Like what we can bring to the world might be really valuable, but if you're connecting it to your bank account, you're not going to do anything with it because you don't think that you have anything to bring to the world. But how many people do we know that took that chance and brought something so valuable that we all needed, and they didn't have anything? They started from nothing. And that like using, like, that's where we need to tap into. Like, just because your bank account doesn't look good right now doesn't mean that you don't have the ability to get out of that. Like we all do. We're not investing in ourselves. And what happens when the whole financial system crashes? Like we're not going to look at money anymore. What are we going to do? Are you just going to sit down okay, now I got nothing? Like, no, you're going to go figure out how to survive, right? Like that's what we do. We figure out how to survive. It's just, but we need to get past that mindset piece first.
Right. And so a couple of things that come to mind when you're saying that is like, it doesn't matter where we start on our journey with money. What matters is what we do from here. Like where we start isn't where we have to end up. So we can start no matter where we are financially, what our money beliefs are, positive, negative, or neutral. Like it doesn't matter. Like we can still continue to grow in that. So we have to focus on like where we are instead of telling ourselves like disempowering thoughts. We can focus on developing a positive relationship with our money, taking control of our thoughts around money, reframing our thinking around money. And like I said, then moving forward, like just because we're here right now doesn't mean that that's where we have to stay. We truly can change our path or trajectory of like where we're going. But I feel like for me it's like, okay, I have financial goals that I want to achieve, and sometimes the thought wants to come into my mind like I'm already behind the 8 ball, like I should have had this figured out a long time ago. Like that's a thought that my brain wants to give me. But then it's like, okay, I've come to have such awareness of that thought, and this is like kind of an example of like helping people see like how they learn and train their brain to have that awareness. Is like, because I've done this work so much in financial thoughts, but also in other aspects of my life, I'm like, now I'm like, oh yeah, there's that thought again. Okay, yep, I'm thinking that thought. And I don't make it a problem that I'm having that thought, or I don't latch onto that thought. I'm like, I have awareness. But then I kind of am like, but okay, instead of thinking, like this is like through the process of like the things that we learn over time, and it doesn't just happen like a flip of the switch, but we use almost kind of like transition thoughts to build our way to a more positive thought that we want. But is even to be like, okay, I may say, okay, my brain wants to say, oh, you're so behind the 8 ball and you should have this figured out a long time ago. But now I can be like, I'm figuring this out. I feel like that's just neutral, right? Like I'm figuring this out. And then like from there, the next thing might look more like I am making changes, or I have made, like I've been able to save this much, or I've been able to pay this off, or, and look to some, like one of my wins, and just start seeing that we can change that thought pattern. But it all comes back to like first learning how to just pause and have awareness. And that's something that I learned like through my coaching certification, and I absolutely love it as a powerful tool. And I'll share it now, even so people can even just start practicing this, is the concept of just like getting your thoughts out on paper. Like some people like to say, just do a thought download or a brain dump or just whatever, but just get stuff down on paper. Because so many times, like if you write something down and then you go back and you look at all those thoughts, and you will realize that they're just thoughts. Because like if you were to go through and you try to determine like what is really truth here, if you were to give like 5 different people all of those thoughts, all 5 people would be like, I don't believe that one, or this is not how I would think about that, or whatever. And so then there's no like solid truth behind it. Because if you were to like basically almost put that question on the witness stand and like put it on trial, like would it stand as a truth? Like when we say, like, okay, if we have 5 people standing out in our yard and be like, it's cloudy today, we're all going to agree that it's cloudy if it's cloudy, right? Or I like even the analogy of like, somebody might be like, oh, I want it to be raining on my wedding day, because they have a whole thing of like, maybe they want like this beautiful rainy whatever wedding. And then you have somebody else that, no, I want a sunny day. Like there's 2 different thought beliefs around the rainy day being a positive or a negative, and or a sunny day being a positive or negative. And so that's the same thing with our thoughts, is like we have our own projection of like what is positive and what is negative. And then when we realize that these are just thoughts, they're not truths. So we start with uncovering and just having that awareness around our thoughts, and getting them out on paper is super helpful to see that.
I think this leads really well into understanding our diversity, right? And so while we can have different beliefs of if a rainy day is good luck for a wedding, or it makes awesome photos, or if it is somber and sad, right? That's our own individual perspective on it. And so being able to understand that we have that across the board in all areas of our life, so that maybe we can understand what works for me is not necessarily what's going to work for Mindy, or not necessarily going to work for Jenny. Could you go a little bit into understanding and accepting our financial diversity?
Yeah. And that, like, and as you were saying that, I'm like, yeah, that's so key, right? Because like some people, for instance, they're like, I want to have a budget and I'm going to follow the budget. I'm just going to do the budget, right? But other people are like, no budget. That's too restrictive. That's too just tight and just uncomfortable for them. So one, we have to need to build a positive relationship with money first. Like we have to kind of like get our mindset and our beliefs around that, and like to know like each person's different. Everybody's going to be at a different starting point. But then like once we know and understand our beliefs and understand like where do we want to go, then we can figure out, like we get a kind of our bookends, like where are we now and where do we want to end up. And then each individual is different, like where they're starting and where they want to go, but each individual journey looks different too, because some people may like the budget and they want to just hammer through getting their debt paid off or building a savings or whatever. And that's fine if that works for one person, but other people might be like, no, I don't want to do that. And so I kind of like the concept of flexible money management. So to have a goal, to have buckets that we maybe allocate our money to, but we don't have like too much strictness and rigidity to it, that we're miserable and we're just not enjoying our journey to becoming debt free. Because that tightness of the just restriction might just cause us to just quit, just like get so far and be like, this isn't sustainable. I can't do it. I don't like it. And then so they just quit. So we get to have, and instead of having like a perfectionist mindset or like, oh, I have to like, I can't deviate from this. Like I set this and I can't deviate from it. But just instead, like maybe figure out like, what are we spending every month? What, kind of like make some areas of like, okay, this is like, I need to make and pay these bills, but then I want more flexibility in these categories of my budget or things. And I know for me personally, it's like I set a budget every month, but what that's kind of where I call it the flexible money management of my budget is I set my budget. I know what's coming in for sure. And I know what has to be paid. And then from that point, I kind of set the rest of my money in categories that I know that I'm like groceries or extra spending or entertainment or whatever that I want to allocate and have money for. But then if something comes up, then it's like I move my money around a little bit. I might have to take out of this bucket and add it to this one because I needed a little bit more over here, or I decided to, go out to an extra dinner. And so like, what else, where is the other sacrifice going to be? So I'm not overspending. I'm still staying within the money that I have available to me, but I'm not depriving and restricting myself of something that I decided I wanted to do, or I decided that, and then the other times it's like, okay, maybe you are at a store and you're like, oh, I want to make this big purchase, right? Or there's this like thing that you just want to buy, but instead of like buying it right then and be like, okay, I know that between this month and next month, if I am willing to sacrifice a little bit out of each of these categories and just have a little bit of an adjustment and set that money aside, then I can go buy it next month. And then you just take away the like, oh, buy it now and worry about how to pay it later. Like you actually have more joy in the anticipation of buying that item. And then it's like, sometimes I know for myself, it's like I've wanted to buy something and then it's like, well, I'm just going to save and wait for it. And then along my journey of saving for it, I'm kind of like, I'm actually really glad I didn't buy it. Then you don't have buyer's remorse either. So now you're not having buyer's remorse. Now you're not also like, let's say you had to put on a credit card, if you would have impulse bought it, then you're not actually spending more on the item because you're not paying for it on a credit card. So it's like just having that awareness, but also having that flexibility and giving yourself those options and learning how to do that with your money, and that not making the money the problem, or that you want to buy this thing a problem. Like, just all of it encapsulated is like, you can have flexibility. It doesn't have to be rigid. It doesn't have to be strict, that we can give ourselves a sustainable and doable way to manage our money, but not sucking the life out of our journey of getting out of debt, or, living the life that we want. We can live the life that we want now, as well as into the future around our money. And a lot of it comes back to having awareness in our mindset, and like knowing where we are and where we want to go.
Yeah. And working with a coach definitely helps you to be able to see that. And as you're sharing this, Mindy, I think so much about those of us who have a little bit of a rebellious personality, right? When you put those rigid guidelines, that it makes you want to do that absolute opposite, right? And I think back in like when I was drinking, I had so many rules and guidelines set up for myself of when I would drink, how much, how often, all of that. And once I started drinking, then, your prefrontal cortex shuts down. So your decision making is not online. And then I would just be like, whatever, you know, I'm just going to do it anyways, right? And then there's so much guilt and shame that comes along afterwards of like, why can't I follow these guidelines? And then you make it mean things, right? I'm weak, right? Because I can't use willpower. And it just goes into a host of other things. And then it becomes really hard to try to navigate your way out of that because you're making it mean things about yourself. And I just think also about, how we are also different. And this is true with the clients that we work with too, of um some of our clients like to count the days that they have been alcohol free, right? And that motivates them, that gives them encouragement. And then we have others who that feels really restrictive, and they don't like, that's not where their focus needs to be, right? And so we're able to really work with people of like, okay, what's going to work for you along this path? And it could also be that they don't want to be alcohol free. They want to moderate. They want to be able to have champagne at weddings, right? And so being able to figure out what it is that they want, then we can start working on this path because it is so individual.
Exactly. Yeah. And so with clients, it's like, before we even worry about creating a budget, we want to know where they're starting from, create a plan, look at their future selves. Like I mentioned earlier, looking to their future, where do they want to go financially? And create short-term goals, long-term goals. And then like, even with long-term goals, then creating like little short-term goals within that to move towards your long-term goal. Cause like hitting those little short-term goal increments is like a boost sometimes of like, you feel like you're getting somewhere, making progress, but and then when we create maybe a monthly goal, or even maybe a savings amount goal that we want to reach, a certain amount of savings in a certain amount of time. Like, I mean, it can look different for each person of like what their particular goal is. That's just like a couple of examples. But then like, once we know where their goals are, then we can create that flexible budget of like what that looks like for them. Because I even think about like when somebody's like on a diet, or they go on a diet because they want to lose weight and stuff, and then they're just like, oh, I can't have this, and I can't, and they tell them all the things they can't have, and that only lasts for a short period of time because it's not sustainable. They just like, they can't handle it. Same with like our money. When we tell ourselves like, oh, we can't do this, that, or the other with our money, then it's like, then we just throw it all out the window and be like, I don't like this. I'm just going to go back to just putting everything on a credit card, for instance, or something, like, and it's not sustainable. So that's where we want to find a plan in ways that work for each individual individually. And that just because it's like what you decide today, your plan is, doesn't mean that next month or the month after it's going to be that same plan. That's where the flexibility comes in and be like, I tried this, but it's just not working. I need to evaluate what worked and then figure out like what changes do I want to make this continuously sustainable and doable for myself. And so, like in that's where I feel like the self-care comes in, because like weekly or monthly, we can like take time to like evaluate and see how are we feeling around how the month is going, or how we are thinking and feeling around our finances and our money beliefs and things and then give ourselves, maybe an hour a week or something to just kind of like take some time to like evaluate that and release all the thoughts and have awareness around that. And then we can create a pleasurable routine that helps us keep us conscious with our money, but it keeps us connected to where we want to go, what our goals are, but it also connects us to ourselves. And it's just in general can be freeing and just makes us feel so much better, just because we take all the drama out of it and we just like look at it as a neutral. And I even like the concept of like looking at it as like a science experiment, like you try something and then you evaluate it. Like what worked here? What was a success? What did I enjoy? What worked well? And then be like, okay, but these things felt maybe too restrictive, or it was tight, or it was uncomfortable. And like, what can I do? What tweak can I make to make that a little bit better, or a little bit easier and more sustainable and doable, like long term? And just having that evaluation and that openness to not feel like just because you said it one way is the way it's going to be for the rest of your life. Like that there's flexibility in making adjustments and changes as you evolve in your journey.
And speaking about that, do you help people work through like what they really want and what their goals are, or what they think they're supposed to? Because we're all given this idea of what the American dream and having it all and all that's supposed to look like. And it's not true for everybody. Like not everybody wants the, fancy cars and mansions and, traveling all over the world. Like not everybody wants that stuff. And so if we're trying to reach a goal that isn't in alignment with who we are, we're always going to feel like we're failing, and it's never going to feel right. Even if you do succeed, it's not going to feel good, and there's going to always be something missing. So do you help people find like get in touch with what really they want and what their values are around it, and try to set aside whatever they've been taught or conditioned to think?
Yeah, so that's an awesome question and a very, very good point. And that is like in the beginning, like when we work together, is like we uncover like what their current beliefs are, what are their beliefs, but also what are their goals, and what is their why. Like what is their why? Like not somebody else's why, or not because society says or whatever. It's like, so what? Society says it should be this, but who says? Like that's what society says. Like what about what you want is you as an individual? Like I'm sure that if we all sat here and said, what are your financial goals? Like mine are going to look completely different than yours, Stephanie, as well as you, Jenny. Like we're all going to have different goals and perspectives of like what is success to us, or what is our desires in our financial journey. And so understanding and helping people, yes, release the beliefs that society or our upbringing or whatever we've been told and taught is like some of those beliefs that we have, maybe we want to keep them. That's fine. Like there's nothing, like we can determine what belief we want to keep and what's going to serve us or not. And then we can then decide like, is this one what I want to keep or not? So we uncover those beliefs. We understand what the client's why is and what their goals and purpose long-term are, and helping them create it personally for them, not somebody else's story or what somebody else says. But when they're given those like, oh, well, so-and-so says I should do this or that, or a lot of times there's a lot of family pressure, a lot of times of like, families are like, oh, well, you need to have X, Y, Z, or you need to go to this college or that college, like all the different pressures that we're constantly put under. But then back up and be like, but that's their thought. That's their belief. We can let them own that and have that. That's theirs. We can decide if that aligns with our core values or not. And if it doesn't, then we can decide what does align with our core values. So to know what individually is what we want and not living into like what somebody else thinks that we should be or who we should be, like living our own lives. Because so many times we just get into this, even in other areas of life, it's like we start trying to like live into other people's expectations instead of like looking at our own values and be like, how am I going to be the best person that I can be in deciding who I want to be? Because if I am authentic and who I am, then I can give that much more back to the world.
This is why self-care is so important, because if we're so busy trying to take care of everyone else and we don't even know what we want, we can't go after our goals. We're always chasing someone else's, and then it never feels right. Like, we have to set this time aside to get to know who we are and what we want, and give ourselves some space from all the people that we're trying to take care of. And because it's so easy to get caught up in that. And that's one of the reasons why we're doing this, because in order to figure out who you are, what you want, and separate that from everything else, you have to take this time and self-care for yourself.
Yeah. And it's like, so many people say that self-care is selfish, but self-care is actually the most unselfish thing that you can do, because if you don't take care of yourself, then you can't help anybody else, because then you become dependent on everybody else. And that's where the selfishness comes in, is because then now you're relying and stealing other people's energy and being that dependent one, instead of you take care of yourself, then you have that much more to give and help others that are in need. And then like when you help those other people, then you can help them also see that their own, like you show that like, oh, because of my self-care, like this, I can now help you. But then if you do your own self-care, then you can do you and then progressively help somebody else. And it's like, it's an upward helping spiral opposed to a depleting, like, oh, now I need help and I need help and I need help. And, like more dependency. We actually, it just keeps multiplying out the other way of like more and more people have more and more to offer and help, because they're all taking the time to do their own self-care.
Wow. What a different world that might be. And so I really hear this, like, awareness is first step, but maybe even before that, maybe there's just like this willingness to invest in ourselves. Maybe there's just this willingness to look at what is going on, right? And so Mindy is graciously sharing an offer with the audience. And so Mindy, could you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So a couple things, like, I mean, people can visit my website, which is mindybolgrincoaching.com. And then on the bottom of the homepage, there is like a free financial guide on there. And it just gives a few different tips and things. And then once you sign up for that, you'll get like, it's a PDF of that like little like tip guide. But then also is on my website, then anyone can schedule just a free consultation. We can have a conversation, just kind of get an overview of, where people are at, what, their goals are. And then I'm offering $100 off a 6-month package or 6 coaching sessions. Cause some people like to do once a month and other people might want to do 2 weeks or every 2 weeks or something, however it looks for each different client. It just depends on the client, but it'd be 6 sessions, essentially $100 off the 6 sessions if it's a paid in full for the 6 sessions. So they just need to mention this, that they got that from this spring program.
Awesome. Perfect. So write that down. No,
That's right.
we'll include it in the show notes as well. So that is such an amazing offer. And I think that there is so much to learn and take a deeper dive into your beliefs around money. And I hope that this gave you a good start of what areas you do want to look at. And we are so thankful for you for listening to this and would love to hear what you were able to take away. And so thank you so much, Mindy, to you for sharing all of this valuable information with us today.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.